My name is Faith Mercer. I'm 30 years old. Last Saturday, my family threw me a surprise birthday party. 40 people showed up. But it wasn't a party. It was an intervention. And I was the target. My mom stood in front of everyone and said I was selfish, ungrateful, and tearing this family apart. My dad read a list, an actual handwritten list, of everything I'd done wrong since childhood. My sister propped her phone on the mantel and went live on TikTok. I sat there quietly. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. Then I pulled out my phone and said, "Funny, I've been recording too." What I played next ended 6 relationships in that room, and none of them were mine. Before we get into this, if you enjoy stories like this, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely like the story, and drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you're listening from tonight. Now let me take you back to 3 years ago, the day my grandmother died and left me in charge of something my mother wanted more than anything. My grandmother's name was Vivian Mercer. She raised tomatoes in her backyard, kept a loaded pistol in her nightstand, and managed her own finances until the week she died at 81. She was the only person in my family who ever looked at me and said, "You're doing fine, sweetheart. Don't let them tell you different." 3 years ago, Vivian passed in her sleep. "Peaceful," the hospice nurse said. I hope that's true. I was sitting next to her when the monitor flatlined. I'd driven 2 hours after my shift to be there. Nobody else came that night. The funeral was standing room only. Vivian was beloved in town. Church board, Rotary Club, 30 years running the same book club. My mother, Diane, wore a black dress she'd bought the day before. Full makeup. She cried exactly twice, both times when someone was watching. After the service, the lawyer, Margaret Hollis, read the will. Vivian had set up a family trust, around $400,000, for the Mercer family. College funds for future grandchildren, emergency medical coverage, a small annual distribution for each beneficiary. And she'd named me trustee. Not my mother, not my father. Me. I was 27, a staff accountant at a mid-size firm. Vivian picked me because I understood numbers and because, in her words, Faith is the only one who won't steal from the cookie jar. I remember looking up from the paperwork and catching my mother's face. She wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at Margaret Hollis with a look I'd never seen before. Jaw tight, eyes calculating. Before we even left the church, I heard her pull Margaret aside. "How quickly can we change the trustee?" I pretended I didn't hear it. I told myself she was grieving. She wasn't. Let me tell you about my sister, Kelsey. Kelsey is 27, 3 years younger than me. She has 12,000 TikTok followers, a failed fashion startup that burned through 40 grand, and an apartment our mother still helps pay for. When the startup folded, Diane told everyone the economy was to blame. When I asked Kelsey what happened to the inventory, she said, "Don't worry about it." Here's the thing about our family. I paid my own way through college. Scholarships, weekend shifts at a tax prep office, ramen for dinner 4 nights a week. Diane didn't come to my graduation. Too busy. Kelsey had a dance recital. 6 months after Vivian's funeral, Kelsey called me. Cheerful, casual. "So, I've got this new idea. Sustainable loungewear. I just need $50,000 from the trust to get started." I pulled up the trust documents, read them twice. "Kelsey, the trust doesn't allow principal withdrawals for personal business ventures. It's in Section 4. Silence. Then, "Are you serious right now?" "I didn't write the rules. Grandma did." She hung up. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "Diane. You're being controlling, Faith. That money is for the family." "It is for the family. For emergencies, education, medical costs, not for startups. You always do this. You always hold everything over our heads." I didn't argue. I just repeated the terms. Diane hung up too. A week later, Kelsey said something on the phone that lodged in my chest like a splinter. She didn't mean for me to hear it. She was talking to Diane in the background while I was on hold. "Mom says if you won't give it up, she'll make everyone see what you really are." I should have paid more attention to that sentence. The campaign started slow. First, it was the phone calls. Diane has this gift. She can cry on command, and she knows how to frame a sentence so the other person fills in the worst parts themselves. She called my aunts, my uncles, the neighbors. Her version of events was always the same. Faith controls the trust, won't let anyone touch a dime, and treats us like strangers. She never mentioned Section 4. She never mentioned that I'd approved 3 legitimate distributions that year. Gerald's dental work, Kelsey's car insurance, a plumbing emergency at the house. She just said I was hoarding Vivian's money. I started noticing the shift. Mrs. Pruitt, who'd lived next door to my parents for 15 years, stopped waving when I pulled into the driveway. Uncle Tom didn't reply to my Thanksgiving text. Aunt Carol, Diane's best friend since high school, looked at me sideways at the grocery store and said, "Your mama's real upset, Faith. Maybe you should think about that." I tried to explain. Nobody wanted to hear it. I asked my father once. Gerald was in the garage, sanding a birdhouse he'd never finish. I said, "Dad, you know I'm following the trust rules. You know that, right?" He didn't look up. "Your mother is just worried about the family, Faith." "That's not what I asked." He kept sanding. "Let it go, sweetheart. She'll calm down." She didn't calm down. 3 weeks before my birthday, Kelsey texted me a photo. A cream-colored invitation, gold script. Surprise 30th birthday party for Faith. Saturday, 6 p.m., Mercer residence. Kelsey had never organized anything for me. Not a card, not a call. She once forgot my birthday entirely and blamed her phone. Something was off. I just didn't know how off. I want you to understand something about the way I was living during those 18 months. I woke up at 6 every morning, drove 45 minutes to the firm, reconciled balance sheets, reviewed audits, met with clients, came home, made dinner, usually something simple, a salad or pasta, paid my bills, managed the trust quarterly, every distribution documented, every expense cross-referenced, every receipt filed in a fireproof box in my closet. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't plotting. I was working. And every few weeks, I'd get a text from a family member that felt like a paper cut. "Heard you won't help Kelsey. Your mom's really struggling, Faith. Why don't you ever come home anymore?" I did come home. I drove 90 minutes round trip at least twice a month. I sat at that kitchen table and watched Diane sigh into her coffee and say, "I just wish things were different." And I'd say, "What do you want to be different, Mom?" And she'd say, "You know what I mean." And I'd leave feeling like I'd failed a test I was never shown. That's the trick with people like Diane. The accusation is always in the air but never on paper. The wound is always implied, never named. You spend your whole life trying to fix something that was never broken, because the brokenness isn't in you. It's in the person pointing at you. But I didn't see that yet. I still believed, honestly, sincerely believed, that if I was patient enough, consistent enough, clear enough, my family would come around. Vivian taught me that. "Family is always worth one more chance," she'd say. Vivian was right about a lot of things. She was wrong about that one. I'll give you one example so you can see how this worked in practice. Thanksgiving, 8 months before the party, I'd driven 90 minutes to be there, brought a sweet potato casserole, Vivian's recipe, the one with the pecan crust. I thought it might be a nice gesture, a bridge. Diane opened the door, looked at the dish, and said, "Oh, I already made one." She hadn't. There was no casserole on the counter. She just didn't want Vivian's recipe on her table. At dinner, Kelsey announced her new business idea, the sustainable loungewear line. The table erupted. Diane clapped. Gerald smiled and said, "That's my girl." Uncle Tom raised his glass. It was a full production. Then Kelsey turned to me. "So, Faith, I'll need the initial capital from the trust by January." Every head at the table swiveled toward me. "Kelsey, the trust doesn't cover business investments. I've explained this." Diane set her fork down. Slowly, deliberately. The room got quiet. "Faith, it's Thanksgiving. Can we not do this today?" "I'm not doing anything. I'm answering a question." You're always so rigid, so cold. Vivian wouldn't have wanted the money just sitting there. Vivian wrote the rules, Mom. I'm following them. Diane dabbed her eye with her napkin, dry eye, wet napkin, and whispered to Carol beside her. Carol looked at me with pity, the kind of pity you reserve for someone who doesn't know they're the problem. I drove home that night in silence. No radio, no podcast, just the highway and the dark and the slow understanding that every holiday, every visit, every phone call was another performance. And my role was always the same, the daughter who ruins things by telling the truth. Let me be clear about what was at stake the night of that party. First, the trust. Margaret Hollis had warned me, quietly, during a routine review, that Diane had contacted her 3 separate times to petition for a change in trustee. Each time, Margaret declined. The trust terms were ironclad. But Margaret also said this: if Diane could build enough social evidence that I was unfit, she might try to take it to probate court. A room full of people testifying that I was unstable? Judges notice patterns. Second, my career. I'm a management accountant at a financial consulting firm. The invitation Kelsey sent went to 40 people, and 3 of them were my coworkers. Dave from audit, Sandra from compliance, Mike from the Atlanta office, visiting for the week. If I got publicly intervened in front of them, if the narrative became that my own family thinks I'm unfit to manage money, my professional reputation doesn't survive that. Not in a small town, not in accounting. Third, the internet. Kelsey had been teasing something big on her TikTok all week. If she filmed whatever was about to happen and posted it, I'd be a punchline for strangers. Forever. Searchable. Attached to my name in any background check, any client Google search, any future employer's 2-minute due diligence. So walking away wasn't an option. If I didn't show up, Diane would say I was hiding. If I showed up and said nothing, she'd call it agreement. If I caused a scene, Kelsey would clip the worst 30 seconds, and I'd be the villain by morning. Every road led to the same ditch, unless I built a different road. I sat on my apartment floor the night I got that invitation, stared at the ceiling. Then I picked up the phone. I called Margaret Hollis first. She picked up on the second ring. I told her about the party, about Kelsey's TikTok teases, about the 18 months of phone calls Diane had been making to everyone I cared about. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Faith, I want you to listen carefully. Ohio is a one-party consent state. If you're part of a conversation, you can record it legally. I've been advising you to document everything for 6 months. Have you been doing that?" I had. Every call with Diane since October. 37 recordings on a folder in my phone labeled insurance. I told Margaret as much. "Good," she said. "Have you listened to all of them?" "Most of them." "Listen to all of them. Tonight." So I did. I sat on my bed with earbuds in and played every single one. And that's when I realized something I hadn't expected. Diane didn't just trash me on those calls. She trashed everyone. Gerald was spineless and useful. Mrs. Pruitt was pathetic and easy to steer. Carol was not a real friend, just convenient. Even Kelsey, Diane's own golden child, was useful because she does whatever I say. Every person Diane had recruited to her side, she'd mocked behind their backs. Every ally was a prop. My second call that night was to Ruth Mercer, my father's older sister. Diane had cut her off 8 years ago after Ruth refused to lend her money. Diane told Gerald that Ruth was jealous and toxic. Gerald believed it. He hadn't spoken to his own sister in years. Ruth answered on the first ring. "I've been waiting for this call," she said. "I'm inviting you to my birthday party. I wouldn't miss it. Aunt Ruth, sit in the back row." The day of the party, I drove to Nora's apartment. She was the only person outside of Margaret and Ruth who knew what I suspected. Nora sat cross-legged on her couch, laptop open, a legal pad balanced on her knee. She's a compliance officer. Her entire career is built on spotting irregularities. She took to this like it was a quarterly review. Walk me through the worst case, she said. Diane stages some kind of intervention, accuses me in front of everyone, pushes me to resign as trustee. Kelsey films the whole thing. And the best case? It's actually a birthday party, and I look paranoid. She closed the laptop. Faith, nobody sets up 40 chairs in rows for a birthday party. I've seen the invitation. There's no mention of food, gifts, or music. It reads like an event agenda. She was right. The invitation listed a start time but no end time. No RSVP, no dress code, no bring a dish. It was designed to get bodies into a room, nothing else. I'm going, I said. I have to. Then I'm going with you. Nora, you don't have to. I sat next to you through the CPA exam. I can sit through your family. That made me laugh, the first real laugh I'd had in weeks. We drove separately. I wanted my own car in that driveway, my own exit. Nora understood without me explaining. Before I left my apartment, I stood at the mirror for a long time. Blazer, clean blouse, hair pulled back. I looked like I was going to a client meeting. That was the point. I opened the recording app, checked the battery, 91%, pressed record, slid the phone into my blazer pocket, microphone up. Whatever happened next, there would be a record. Saturday evening, 6 o'clock. The sun was low over the cul-de-sac, throwing long shadows across the Mercer lawn. I counted the cars from the end of the street. 40, easy, some parked on the grass. Diane's doing. Vivian would have hated that. I sat in my car for 2 full minutes. Watched a pair of robins fight over something in the gutter. Ordinary evening. Ordinary birds. Nothing about the sky suggested that my life was about to split in half. I stepped out and walked to the front door. Unlocked, as always. The first thing I noticed was the chairs. They weren't scattered around food tables like a party. They were arranged in rows, 5 across, 8 deep, facing a small open space near the fireplace, like a conference room, like a hearing. A banner hung above the mantel. Happy 30th Faith. The H was crooked. The exclamation point was peeling at the corner. There was no cake, no music, no plates, no napkins, no balloons. 40 people filled those rows. Family, neighbors, co-workers, church acquaintances. Some smiled when I walked in, some didn't. Dave from my office raised a hand in a small wave. Mrs. Henderson whispered something to her husband. Nora found me in the hallway. She grabbed my elbow, her eyes tight. Faith, the chairs are in rows. There's no music. Something's wrong. I know. Do you want to leave? We can walk out right now. I looked past her shoulder. Through the archway, Diane stood near a portable microphone on a short stand. She was smiling. The smile she uses at church, at PTA meetings, at charity functions. Gerald sat in the front row, a folded piece of paper on his lap. Kelsey was adjusting her phone on the mantel. No, I said. I'm staying. Diane clapped her hands twice. Thank you all for coming tonight. This isn't a birthday party. She said it like she was announcing a bake sale. We're here tonight because someone in this family needs help, and sometimes love means saying the hard things. Diane paused, let the silence do its work. Then she turned to me. Faith, sweetheart, please sit down. 40 people turned to look at me. I walked to the empty chair at the front, sat, crossed my ankles, folded my hands in my lap. Diane leaned into the microphone. We're here because Faith is selfish. She let that word hang in the air like smoke. She's ungrateful. She's tearing this family apart. A few heads nodded. I recognized them. The ones who'd gotten the phone calls, the rehearsed ones. Uncle Tom, Mrs. Pruitt, Carol. Each one primed with Diane's version of events, delivered in Diane's teary, concerned, generous voice. Since she took control of her grandmother's trust, she's shut us out. She's refused to help her own sister launch her business. She's refused to visit. She treats this family like a burden she can't wait to put down. I watched the room. Some people looked uncomfortable. Some looked angry. At me. Dave sat near the back with his arms crossed, brow furrowed, clearly confused about what he'd walked into. Sandra was next to him, clutching her purse. "I've spoken to many of you privately," Diane continued, softer now, playing the wound. "And I know I'm not the only one who's noticed the change in Faith." More nods from the rehearsed section. Mrs. Pruitt clasped her hands like she was at a prayer meeting. I sat still, hands folded, face neutral. In the corner of my eye, Kelsey lifted her phone from the mantel and flipped it to face the room. A red dot pulsed. She was live. Gerald stood. He was wearing the brown polo Diane bought him for Father's Day, the one he never chose himself. He unfolded the piece of paper slowly, and I watched his fingers tremble against the crease. "Faith," he said, cleared his throat, started again. "Your mother and I put together some examples, things we'd like you to hear." He didn't look at me. Not once. "When you were 12, you refused to come to the family Christmas dinner." I was 12. I had the flu. I was vomiting into a bucket every 20 minutes. Diane told me to come downstairs anyway because it looked bad in front of the relatives. When you were 18, you chose a college 3 hours away instead of staying close to home. I chose the school that offered a full ride. The local college offered nothing. Diane wanted me at the community college so I could babysit Kelsey after school. When you were 25, you accepted the trustee role without asking your mother first, Vivian asked me privately. She told me specifically not to discuss it with Diane until the paperwork was signed. I understood why now. Gerald kept reading. Each item was a moment where I'd made a reasonable, independent choice, repackaged as an act of rebellion. Going to summer camp at 14, getting my own apartment at 22, declining to co-sign Kelsey's first business loan. His hand shook the entire time. I watched the paper flutter with each breath. Then I noticed the handwriting. Gerald's handwriting is blocky, all capitals, engineer neat. The writing on that paper was looping, slanted, pressed hard into the page. Diane's handwriting, not his. He finished the list and sat down without looking up. Diane touched his shoulder, the way you'd pat a dog that fetched the morning paper. The room shifted after the list. You could feel it, a slow rearrangement of sympathies, like tectonic plates grinding beneath the surface. Some people leaned forward. Mrs. Pruitt dabbed her eyes. Carol put a hand over her heart. These were the faithful, Diane's network, her phone tree of grief and grievance, and they responded to the list the way they were supposed to, with sad, righteous head-shaking. But others pulled back. Dave uncrossed his arms and looked at Sandra. Sandra shook her head, a tiny motion, barely visible, but it said everything. The Hendersons in the fourth row exchanged a glance I recognized from 20 years of church potlucks, the glance that says, "This is not what we signed up for." A woman I didn't know, someone's +1, or maybe a neighbor from 2 streets over, stood up quietly and slipped out the side door. Nobody stopped her. Nobody acknowledged it. Diane didn't notice. She was building momentum. "Faith," she said, turning to me with wet eyes. "We're not saying these things to hurt you. We're saying them because we love you, because we want our family back." Kelsey was reading her TikTok comments quietly, a half smile on her face. She tilted the screen toward Diane. "Watch my family finally hold my sister accountable." The caption she'd posted. Thousands of people watching a woman get ambushed at her own birthday party. I looked at Diane's face. The practiced concern, the quivering lip, the slight forward lean that invited sympathy. I'd seen that face 1,000 times. At parent-teacher conferences, at Vivian's funeral, at every dinner party where she needed to be the most worried, the most burdened, the most giving person in the room. "Well, Faith," Diane said, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" I had plenty, but not yet. The testimonials kept coming. Diane was conducting now, pointing, nodding, cueing people like a choir director. "Aunt Linda, Gerald's cousin. I tried to call you last Christmas, Faith. You never called back." I did call back. Diane told Linda I hadn't. I found out 3 months later. Jim Patterson, a family friend from church. Your grandmother would be disappointed, Faith. She believed in family above all. Jim had known Vivian for 40 years. He didn't know that Vivian had written a private letter to Margaret Hollis saying, in her own handwriting, that Diane should never have access to the trust principal. But Jim didn't know that. He only knew what Diane told him over coffee at the diner last month. The worst one came from Kelsey. She stepped forward, put her hand on Diane's arm, and looked at me with something designed to resemble sadness. Faith, I just want my sister back. I miss who you used to be, before the trust changed you. The trust didn't change me. The trust revealed what had always been there, a family that measured love by compliance, and a mother who measured compliance by control. I looked at Kelsey's phone on the mantel, still recording. Comments scrolling. OMG, this is so sad, and the sister is so calm, and Faith seems cold TBH. Strangers judging a story they'd heard one side of. That's the internet. That's Diane's whole strategy, scaled up. 40 people in this room, and not one of them had asked me a single question. Not one had said, Faith, what's your version? They came to watch. They came because Diane told them to come. The jury was seated. The verdict was pre-written. And I still hadn't said a word. I'm sitting there, listening to my own father read a list of my so-called failures. And every single one was just me choosing to grow up. Choosing to earn my own way. Choosing to stand on my own feet. If you've ever been told that being independent makes you a bad daughter, a bad son, a bad person, type, I know that feeling in the comments. And if this story is hitting close to home, hit that subscribe button. I promise you, what happens next is worth staying for. Let me rewind for a second, because there's something you need to know about what was in my pocket. 6 months before this party, I'd sat in Margaret Hollis's office after Diane filed her third trustee removal petition. Margaret had a way of saying important things quietly, like she was reading a weather report. Faith, Ohio is a one-party consent state. Start recording every call. I didn't want to. Recording your own mother feels like crossing a line, even when she's already crossed every line there is. But Margaret wasn't asking me to build a weapon. She was asking me to build a record. Protect the trust. Protect myself. There's a difference. So I started. Every call from Diane, every voicemail, every tearful Sunday lecture. I labeled the folder Insurance on my phone, and I rarely listened back. It felt wrong, like reading someone's diary, except the diary was about how much they resented you. The night before the party, Margaret's voice on the phone. Have you listened to all of them? Most. All of them. Tonight. So I did. 37 recordings, earbuds in, lights off. And that's when the picture changed completely. Because Diane didn't reserve her cruelty for me. She spent those calls shredding everyone. Gerald was spineless. Pruitt was pathetic. Carol was convenient, not a friend. Kelsey was useful, not loved. Every person she'd recruited to her cause, she'd insulted them in private, praised them in public, and used the gap between those two things to build a machine. On the night of the party, before I walked into the house, I opened the recording app, pressed record, slid the phone into my blazer, microphone up. I didn't have a speech, I didn't have a plan. I just had the truth, in her own voice, sitting warm against my ribs. Diane was waiting for me to crack. I could see it in the way she leaned forward, hands clasped, the microphone tilted toward the empty air between us. She wanted tears. She wanted shouting. She wanted a meltdown she could point to and say, "See, this is what I've been telling everyone." I gave her nothing. Instead, I let my eyes drift to the back row. Last seat on the right, near the hallway to the kitchen. A woman sat there alone. Silver hair pinned back, gray wool coat, even though it was May. Hands folded, posture straight as a hymnal. Ruth Mercer, my father's older sister, the woman Diane had surgically removed from this family 8 years ago. Nobody noticed her. Gerald hadn't turned around. He was staring at the floor, the crumpled list still in his fist. Kelsey was monitoring her TikTok comments. Diane had arranged the room so the audience faced her, not each other. Ruth caught my eye. One nod. Small, steady. The nod of a woman who'd waited a long time to be in this room again. I looked back at Diane. I asked you a question, Faith. She lowered her voice, the way she always does when the audience is large enough to require softness. Do you have anything to say for yourself? More nods from the rehearsed rows. Uncle Tom rubbed the back of his neck, still unable to look directly at me. Then Diane did the thing I'd been waiting for. She reached into her bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper, slid it across the folding table between us with one manicured finger. Faith, if you truly love this family, sign this. The room leaned forward. Diane invited the room to share their hearts. Uncle Tom went first. He stood with his hands jammed in his pockets and wouldn't meet my eyes. Faith, your mom says you won't return her calls. That doesn't seem right. I returned every call, every single one. Diane was the one who let them ring through, then told everyone I'd gone dark. Mrs. Pruitt was next. She pressed a tissue under her glasses. Your mother cries to me every Sunday after church, honey. She says she's losing you. Those Sunday calls weren't grief sessions. They were campaign updates. I knew that now. Dave, my coworker, half stood from the back. He looked like a man who'd walked into the wrong courtroom. I didn't know it was this bad, Faith. Kelsey said it was a birthday thing. He sat back down fast. Sandra was already buttoning her coat. One by one, the testimonials rolled in. Same phrases, same rhythm. We're worried about you. Your mother just wants what's best. Family comes first. Each sentence had Diane's fingerprints on it, polished smooth, distributed in advance, delivered on cue. Kelsey picked up her phone and read a TikTok comment to the room, grinning. Wow, your sister sounds toxic. See, Faith? She held the screen toward me. Even strangers can tell. I watched the red light pulse on her phone. Still live, still broadcasting this to thousands of people I'd never meet. I looked at the faces around me. 40 people. Some uncomfortable, some convinced. A few already checking the time. They'd been assembled like a jury, but only one side had been allowed to present its case. That was about to change. But first, that piece of paper on the table. Nora couldn't hold it anymore. She stood up in the third row, blazer sharp, shoulders square, voice clear enough to reach the back wall. This is wrong. This is not an intervention. This is an ambush. Faith doesn't have an addiction. She doesn't have a crisis. She manages a trust responsibly, and you're putting her on trial for it. The room stirred. A few heads swiveled toward Diane for a response. Diane pivoted without missing a beat. She tilted her chin, softened her gaze, and said, Nora, sweetheart, you're Faith's friend. Of course you'd defend her. A tender pause. But sometimes the people closest to us are the ones enabling us the most. Kelsey from the side. Nora, you're not family. This isn't about you. Nora opened her mouth, but Uncle Jim, Diane's cousin, put a firm hand on her arm. She sat. Not because she agreed, because the room had already closed ranks around her, and one more word would have made her the new target. She looked at me across 2 rows of chairs. Her eyes said everything. Under my seat, out of sight, I reached back and squeezed her hand once. It's okay, I whispered. Sit down. Diane watched the exchange with a satisfied, pitying smile. She smoothed the front of her blouse and turned the microphone back toward me. Faith, your silence speaks volumes. You don't even care enough to defend yourself. Then she tapped the paper on the table. This is a voluntary resignation as trustee of the Vivian Mercer Family Trust, your grandmother's trust. If you love us, if you love this family at all, you'll sign it. Right now, in front of everyone. Kelsey slid a ballpoint pen across the table. The room held its breath. There it was. Not love, not concern, Not 40 people gathered because they were worried about my well-being. Just a dotted line and a ballpoint pen. I picked up the paper, read it slowly. The language was clumsy. Too simple for a legal document, too formal for a family conversation. No attorney had drafted this. Diane had typed it at the kitchen table, probably while Gerald sanded something useless in the garage. Voluntary resignation as trustee of the Vivian Mercer Family Trust. I set the paper down and looked at the room. Something had shifted in the air. Dave was frowning, arms uncrossed for the first time. Mrs. Henderson leaned toward her husband, whispering. Even Uncle Tom's expression had changed. Like the equation he'd been solving had suddenly come up wrong. A resignation document. At a birthday party. In front of 40 witnesses and a live TikTok audience. Gerald stared at the paper from his front row chair, his lips parted. He glanced at Diane, searching for something, an explanation maybe, or a signal, and got nothing. He hadn't known about this part, I was sure of it. The flash of confusion across his face was real. Just sign it, Faith. Kelsey's voice, light and sharp as a paper cut. Then we can all move on with our lives. I set the pen down beside the paper, folded my hands. For the first time all evening I smiled. Not a warm smile, not a cruel one. The smile of someone who's just been handed the last piece of a puzzle they've been assembling for 6 months. Mom, I said. My voice was level. You told everyone in this room that you're doing this because you love me. I do love you. You told them everyone here agrees with you. They do. Okay. I reached into my blazer pocket. Let's hear what you really think about everyone. I stood up slowly. No rush. I'd spent 30 years earning this kind of quiet. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I mean that. A few confused looks, a few automatic nods. Mom, before I respond to anything said tonight, I want to play something for this room. These are phone conversations between me and my mother, recorded over the past 6 months. Her voice, her words, nothing edited, nothing spliced. Diane's posture changed, subtle, a tightening of the jaw, a pulling back of the shoulders, the first crack in 25 years of performance. Faith, this isn't the time. You had the microphone for 45 minutes, Mom. I'll need about 10. I tapped the screen, selected the first file. I want everyone in this room to understand. I'm not playing these to embarrass anyone. I'm playing them so you can hear what my mother says about you when you're not around. Mrs. Pruitt's chin lifted. Uncle Tom's hands went still. This first recording is from March 14th. Mom called me about the trust and then started talking about Dad. I pressed play. Diane's voice filled the living room. Clear, casual, unmistakable. The same voice that had just told 40 people she was acting out of love. Gerald is spineless. He does whatever I tell him. Honestly, I could hand him a phone book and tell him to read it at Faith's intervention and he'd do it. The man has zero backbone. Never has. Gerald's head snapped up. The color drained from his face. Not flushed, not red. White, the white of something being extracted. Diane stepped forward. That's taken out of context. Context, I said. Sure, here's more context. I pressed the next file. April 9th. Diane's voice again, mid-laugh, talking on speakerphone in her kitchen, the clatter of dishes in the background. Pruitt? Oh, she's useful. That's about it. She believes anything I feed her. I just need her sitting there nodding at the right moment. She's been doing it for 15 years. Why stop now? The woman is pathetic. Sweet, sure, but pathetic. Mrs. Pruitt stood up. Not fast, not theatrical. She stood the way a person stands when the floor shifts beneath them and they need to find something solid. Her purse was already on her shoulder. She looked at Diane, one long, steady look that carried the weight of 15 years of Sunday phone calls, casseroles, and carpools, and walked out the side door without a word. The door clicked shut. Nobody followed her. Nobody spoke. Diane's composure was fracturing. Faith, you had no right. I had every right. Ohio is a one-party consent state. I was a participant in every one of these calls. I pressed the next file. April 22nd. Diane talking about her best friend. Carol thinks we're best friends. She's wrong. She's convenient. She drives me to appointments, picks up prescriptions, runs errands when I ask. That's not friendship. That's a service I don't have to pay for. Carol was in the second row. Stout woman, kind hands, a laugh that could carry through walls. She didn't make a sound. Her chin dropped slowly, her shoulders curled inward, and she pressed both palms to her knees. She rose, carefully, deliberately, and walked through the front door. 2 empty chairs. The room was beginning to understand. Diane grabbed the edge of the table with both hands. "Faith, stop this right now." "I'm not finished, Mom." The next recording was May 3rd. Diane on the phone with me, venting about Kelsey. I'd almost forgotten this call. Just another Tuesday, another rant I'd learned to let wash over me. Except this time, I'd been recording. Kelsey's startup was a joke. Everyone knew it except her. But she's useful. She does whatever I tell her because she thinks she's going to get the money eventually. As long as she believes that, she stays in line. That's all that matters. Kelsey's phone slipped from her hand and bounced on the carpet. She stared at the empty space where the words had just been. Her mouth shaped the sound before her voice caught up. "Mom?" The word cracked down the center. Not anger, something worse. The sound of a person hearing, for the first time, the actual terms of a deal they thought was love. Kelsey snatched her phone from the floor. The TikTok stream was still running. She jammed her thumb against the screen, killing it, but the red light had been broadcasting for over 20 minutes. Everything Diane had said was already in the hands of thousands of strangers. I played the final clip. May 15th. If it weren't for the house, I would have left Gerald years ago. He's got nothing else going for him. He knows it. I know it. The only reason I stay is the deed. Gerald didn't stand. He didn't speak. He folded forward, elbows on knees, both hands pressed to his face. His shoulders moved once, a single convulsive motion, and then he was still. I turned off the phone, set it on the table, next to the resignation paper and the pen. I didn't end those relationships, Mom. You did, months ago, in your own words. The room after the recordings was a different room. Uncle Tom stood up. He didn't say anything to Diane. He didn't say anything to me. He pulled his jacket from the back of his chair, buttoned it slowly, and walked to the door. At the threshold, he turned and looked at Gerald, just Gerald, and gave a small, sad shake of his head. Then he was gone. Dave was already standing. He caught my eye from across the room, pressed his lips together in something that wasn't quite an apology and wasn't quite a nod, and left with Sandra 2 steps behind him. Sandra paused long enough to squeeze my arm as she passed. The Hendersons left together, hand in hand, without looking at anyone. Jim Patterson, the church friend who'd quoted Vivian minutes ago, sat frozen in his seat, staring at the microphone stand like it had sprouted teeth. He stood eventually, muttered, "Excuse me," to no one in particular, and shuffled out the front door. In 90 seconds, the room went from 40 people to 12, then 8, then 5. Diane stood behind the folding table. Her hands were flat on the surface, fingers spread, as if she were holding the table down or holding herself up. Her chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. The smile was gone. The performance was over. Underneath it was something I'd never seen on my mother's face before. Not anger, not sadness, but the raw, animal recognition that control had slipped through her fingers and wasn't coming back. Kelsey sat in the front row, phone dark, shoulders hunched, staring at the carpet. She looked 20 years old. She looked lost. Gerald hadn't moved. His hands still covered his face. The crumpled list lay on the floor beside his chair. I stood in the middle of it all, phone in hand, and felt nothing that I expected to feel. 6 relationships. Gone. Not because I played dirty, but because the truth finally had a speaker. If you've ever been the person everyone blamed while the real problem smiled and waved at the neighbors, I see you. Type, "Truth wins" in the comments, and share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Now, You might think the story ends here. It doesn't. Because what happened after the room cleared? That's where the real fallout begins. The room was hemorrhaging. People gathered coats, avoided eye contact, whispered to each other in tight clusters near the door. 2 neighbors left without a word. Uncle Jim muttered something to his wife, and they were gone. The Hendersons walked out holding hands, heads down, like they were leaving a funeral that wasn't theirs. Then a voice came from the back row. Low, clear, steady. "Gerald." My father turned. His face was swollen, his eyes raw, and when he saw who was standing there, the last trace of color left his cheeks. "Ruth?" Aunt Ruth walked forward from the back row, unhurried. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice was the kind that fills a room the way a church bell fills a valley, not loud, just present. "I've been trying to tell you for 20 years, Gerald. This is who Diane is. This is who she's always been." Diane spun around. "What is she doing here? I did not invite her." "I did," I said. Ruth stopped 3 feet from Gerald. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't performing. She looked like a woman who'd held a door open for 2 decades and had finally seen someone walk through it. "Diane told you I was jealous," Ruth said quietly. "She told you I hated your family. She cut me out because I said no when she asked for $8,000. That's the whole story, Gerald. The whole thing." Gerald's jaw worked. Nothing came out. "I have the text messages. 17 pages. Everything she wrote about me. And about you." Diane stepped toward Ruth. "She's lying. She's always been jealous of—" "Diane." Ruth didn't raise her voice. "I'm not here for you. I'm here for my brother." The remaining guests moved for the exits, quietly, quickly, like people leaving a building they no longer trusted. Ruth placed a hand on Gerald's shoulder. He didn't pull away. For a moment, neither of them moved. A brother and a sister standing together for the first time in 8 years, in a room that was emptying out like a bathtub with the plug pulled. Diane watched them. Her face cycled through expressions: rage, disbelief, calculation, settling on something that resembled panic. She was running out of audience. "This is a setup," she said. Her voice was higher now, strained. "Faith planned this. She recorded me without my permission. She brought Ruth here to ambush me. I held up one finger. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed. Margaret Hollis picked up on the first ring. I put it on speaker. "Margaret, it's Faith. I'm at my parents' house. You're on speaker." "I understand. Go ahead." "Mom, Margaret is the attorney who manages Grandma Vivian's trust. I believe you two have spoken." Diane said nothing. Margaret's voice was measured, precise, unhurried. "Mrs. Mercer, I've received and declined your petition to remove Faith as trustee 3 times. Her position is legally sound and supported by Vivian Mercer's explicit written instructions." Diane gripped the table. "That trust should be managed by—" "Additionally," Margaret continued, "any attempt to coerce a trustee into resignation under duress, such as a public gathering designed to pressure her into signing, could constitute grounds for removing you as a beneficiary entirely." The silence pressed against every surface in that room. "You can't do that," Diane whispered. "I can, and I will, if Faith requests it." I let the words settle. Then I looked at my mother. "I'm not requesting it tonight, but if there's a next time, I won't hesitate." I picked up the resignation paper, folded it once, set it in front of Diane. "I won't be signing this." Margaret said, "Call me if you need anything, Faith." The line went dead. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Diane did something I'd never seen her do in public. She lost the mask entirely. "You ungrateful!" She stopped herself, swallowed, looked around the room, at the 7 or 8 people still seated, at the empty chairs, at the crooked banner. She was searching for allies and finding none. "After everything I've done for this family," she said. Her voice was shaking now, genuine shaking, not the practiced tremor she used on phone calls. "After everything I sacrificed, this is how you repay me? Ruth spoke from behind Gerald. "What exactly did you sacrifice, Diane?" Diane pointed at Ruth. "You don't get to talk. You haven't been part of this family in years." "Because you removed me. Because I said no to you one time." Diane's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. It was the first time in my 30 years of life that I'd seen my mother speechless. Not performing speechlessness, not the dramatic hand-to-the-chest pause she used for effect. Actually, genuinely unable to produce a sentence that would fix what had just happened. Kelsey stood up from the front row. She didn't look at Diane. She didn't look at me. She picked up her phone, shoved it in her pocket, grabbed her jacket, and walked out the back door. No goodbye, no slam, just the soft click of the latch. Gerald lifted his head from his hands. His eyes were red, his face swollen. He looked at Diane. He looked at Ruth. He looked at me. Then he stood up, walked past Diane without touching her, and went upstairs. I heard the guest bedroom door close. Diane was alone in her own living room. I picked up my purse and walked toward the front door. "Faith," her voice small now. "Faith, please." I didn't turn around. By 7:30 the house was empty. 40 people came, 40 people left. Nobody said happy birthday. Nobody took down the banner which still hung crooked over the mantel with its peeling exclamation point and its factory-perfect font. I walked out the front door and down the driveway. The May air was warm, smelled like cut grass and someone's charcoal grill 3 houses over. A normal Saturday evening for everyone else on that street. Kelsey was sitting in her car, engine off, staring at her phone. The TikTok stream had been live for over 20 minutes before she killed it. Long enough. Screenshots were already circulating. By morning, she'd delete the account entirely. But the internet has a longer memory than any family. Gerald stood in the doorway behind me, framed by the porch light. He watched me walk to my car. He didn't call out. He didn't wave. He stood there, a 60-year-old man in a brown polo, holding a crumpled list of accusations that weren't even his. I caught him in my rearview mirror as I pulled away. He was crying. Not the way Diane cried. Not for performance. Not for leverage. He was crying the way a person cries when they realize they've been reading someone else's script for 30 years and the curtain just came down. Nora followed me home. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just pulled into the spot beside mine, walked up the stairs behind me, and sat at my kitchen table in the dark. She made tea. I let mine go cold. "You did the right thing," she said. "Then why do I feel like I lost something?" She set down her mug. "You didn't lose them, Faith. You just stopped carrying them." At midnight, she drove to the gas station and came back with a cupcake. Vanilla. 1 candle. I made a wish. The week after the party was the quietest week of my life. I went to work. I filed reports. I ate lunch at my desk. I came home, took off my shoes, and sat in the same kitchen chair where Nora had made me tea. I didn't call anyone. I didn't check social media. I just sat. Some people imagine that after you stand up for yourself, there's a rush, a triumph, a soundtrack swelling in the background while you walk away in slow motion. That's not how it works. Standing up for yourself feels like surgery. Necessary, precise, and it hurts for days afterward. I kept replaying Gerald's face. Not the crying. The moment before the crying. The moment when he heard Diane say she'd have left him years ago if it weren't for the house. That wasn't shock on his face. It was confirmation. He already knew. He'd always known. He just hadn't heard her say it out loud. I thought about Kelsey, too, about the look on her face when Diane called her useful. Not loved, useful. Kelsey had spent her entire life performing for Diane's approval, and she'd just learned that the approval was never real. It was a leash, disguised as a hug. I didn't feel sorry for them. I didn't feel vindicated either. I felt the particular emptiness that comes after you've been carrying a weight so long that when you finally set it down, your arms don't know what to do. On Thursday night, I found a voicemail from an unknown number. I almost deleted it. Then I listened. It was Mrs. Pruitt. Her voice was thick, uncertain. Faith, I owe you an apology. A real one. Not through a door. When you're ready, I'd like to have that conversation. I saved the message. I wasn't ready yet, but I would be. The fallout came in waves. Within the first week, Mrs. Pruitt sent Diane a handwritten letter, 3 sentences, ending a 15-year friendship. Carol changed her locks and stopped answering Diane's calls. Uncle Tom phoned me on Wednesday, voice stiff with embarrassment. I should have asked for your side, Faith. I didn't. That's on me. Dave pulled me aside at the office Thursday. Kelsey told me it was a birthday dinner. I'm sorry I was part of that. I told him there was nothing to apologize for. He'd been lied to. Most of them had been. Kelsey lost her 12,000 followers in 4 days. The TikTok clips, Diane's voice calling her useful, and her startup a joke, had been screen recorded and reposted across 3 platforms. Her second startup's investor saw them and pulled out by Friday. Kelsey went silent. No posts, no stories, no contact. Diane called me 14 times in 7 days. I didn't answer once. She texted, "You destroyed this family." I screenshotted it and forwarded it to Margaret. Margaret replied, "Documented." Gerald started sleeping in the guest room. Ruth told me he hadn't filed anything. He hadn't left. But he'd started seeing a therapist, his first appointment in 60 years of living. 2 weeks later, Gerald asked to meet me at a diner halfway between our houses. Vinyl booths, weak coffee, a waitress who called everyone on. He looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. "I didn't know about the resignation paper," he said. "But you knew about the list, Dad. You read it." He pressed his thumb into the table edge. "I thought if I did what she asked, she'd settle down." "She doesn't settle down, Dad. She escalates." He wiped his eyes with a paper napkin. "I love you, Dad, but I can't keep setting myself on fire to keep this family warm." He nodded. He left first. I stayed and drank my coffee. I sat in that diner booth for another hour after Gerald left. The waitress refilled my cup twice without asking. The second time, she set down a plate with a slice of lemon pie I hadn't ordered. "On the house, hun. You look like you could use it." I didn't eat the pie, but I stared at it for a while. Something about the gesture, the casualness of it, the small, uncomplicated kindness from a stranger, cracked something open in my chest that I'd been holding shut for weeks. I thought about Vivian, about her kitchen, about the way she'd slide a cup of tea across the counter and say, "Tell me about your day, sweetheart," and actually wait for the answer. She never interrupted. She never redirected the conversation back to herself. She just listened. That's what I missed most. Not the money, not the trust, not the title of trustee. I missed being heard by someone who didn't have an agenda. Vivian picked me for a reason. She saw something in me that Diane spent 30 years trying to bury, the ability to hold the line, to say, "These are the rules," and mean it. To love someone without needing to own them. I paid for my coffee and the pie I didn't eat. Left a big tip. Drove home with the windows down and the radio off. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. The cursor blinked in an empty email draft for 10 minutes before I started typing. Every sentence I wrote, I deleted and rewrote. Not because the words were wrong, but because I wanted to make sure they were mine. Not Diane's narrative, not Gerald's guilt, not Kelsey's silence, mine. I sent the email on a Sunday morning, short, clear, professional, no emotion, no history lesson, just boundaries. To Diane Mercer, Gerald Mercer, Kelsey Mercer. CC, Margaret Hollis. Subject, moving forward. I will continue to serve as trustee. Distributions will follow Grandma Vivian's original terms. That is not a negotiation. I am open to family counseling with a licensed therapist, a real therapist in a real office, not an intervention, not a public event. Any future attempt to publicly pressure, defame, or coerce me will result in a formal review of beneficiary eligibility. Margaret Hollis has been informed. I love this family. But love without boundaries is not love. It's control. And I'm done participating in control. Faith. Diane didn't respond. Acknowledging the email meant acknowledging the boundary. And Diane doesn't acknowledge things she can't override. Kelsey unblocked me on Instagram 3 days later. No message, no apology. Just a quiet reopening of a door she'd slammed shut. I noticed. I didn't walk through it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That would be her work to do, not mine. Gerald wrote back one line. I understand. 2 words, honest in a way that 30 years of longer sentences had never been. Ruth called that evening. She didn't celebrate. She didn't gush. She said, Vivian would be proud of you, sweetheart. We talked about her garden, a mystery novel she was reading, the weather in Columbus. Normal things, the kind of conversation family is supposed to sound like. After we hung up, I cleaned my apartment, opened the windows for the first time in weeks, bought yellow tulips, and put them on the kitchen table. For the first time since Vivian died, my home felt like home. I turned 30 in a room full of people who'd been told to hate me. My mother orchestrated it. My father read the script. My sister broadcast it to strangers for content. 40 people watched, and most of them did nothing. Because silence is easier than questions, and questions are harder than taking someone's word for it. I survived. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't flip tables or storm out or deliver some rehearsed monologue that would have played well on a highlight reel. I let the truth do the work, in my mother's own voice, in her own words, in recordings she never knew existed. 6 relationships collapsed that night, and every one of them was a lie Diane had constructed. Each lie caved under the simplest possible force, the sound of her actually saying what she meant. My birthday cake never showed up. Diane either forgot to order one or never intended to. The only cake I got was a gas station cupcake at midnight. Vanilla, 1 candle. Nora singing off-key in my dark kitchen with flour on her sleeve from something she'd baked earlier that week for someone else's celebration. It was the best birthday I've ever had. If you're sitting in a room right now, real or figurative, where the people who should love you are telling you that your boundaries make you selfish, that your independence makes you ungrateful, that your refusal to be controlled makes you the problem, I want you to hear something. You are not selfish for protecting yourself. You are not ungrateful for saying no. You are not tearing anything apart. You're building something new, something honest, something that belongs to you. 30 looked nothing like I'd pictured. But for the first time in my life, it looked like me. So here's my question for you. If you were in that room, 40 chairs, 1 microphone, your mother holding a pen, what would you have done? Would you have signed the paper, walked out, or hit play? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to hear what happened 3 months later, because trust me, Diane was far from finished, check the link in the description. The follow-up is already there. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying. And remember, your boundaries are not up for a vote.